You're listening to the Fan to Fan podcast, and today we're talking about fake documentaries like Without Warning and Ghost Watch. Here we go. Welcome to the Fan to Fan podcast. This is your host, Bernie Gonzalez, and I am here yet again with fellow fan, comedian, podcaster, Chad Lind. Chad, what's going on?
Thank you for having me.
So in the last episode, we discussed the War of the Worlds broadcast, and we got into Orson Welles, some of his influences, and the impact that the broadcast had. And we kind of got into Orson Welles as the master manipulator. But even in that episode, we also discussed other examples of false documents, which really started, that was really the theme for that episode and this episode. The idea that you have a work of fiction and you have some amount of truth in it. And that truth can be in police reports or journals or diaries, footage of news anchors, all these things that are examples of truth, of things that we believe to be truthful, that we believe to be nonfiction, and that makes the fiction that much more real, or at least appear to be real. And we brought up examples like Spinal Tap and examples like The Office and Parks and Rec, examples that are more comedic, and you even mentioned Monty Python.
Right. It's really easy to create that type of film. I mean, not that it's easy to create it and make it entertaining and make it believable, but it's really easy to do that under the concept of the documentary format. Like the Spinal Tap is clearly a documentary. Even the way that Christopher Guest used the Spinal Tap format to then create what became like Waiting for Guffman, and then later on Parks and Recreation and The Office, like this concept of it kind of everything being like a documentary where there are asides by the cast to talk about stuff. It does create this feeling of it being real, but there's a big difference between that and what Orson Welles did with War of the Worlds. And again, I think that there is a fundamental difference between it happening in comedy where they're kind of just poking you with the stick of breaking the fourth wall. And there's a difference between that and then some of the things like War of the Worlds, and then some of the links that you sent me to those TV shows.
Yes.
A lot of which I've actually seen. And that's a whole different beast.
So let's go back to War of the Worlds. So that airs in 1938, like you said, 1 year before World War II starts in September of 39. People were already anticipating how long it would have been before the U.S. is affected by the war, going on in other countries. But then the same phenomenon occurs in the 80s during the Cold War. That list of links that you referred to before were some examples of films that featured nuclear attacks, which in a way, if we're afraid of getting into World War and the idea of sci-fi coming into it is reflected in War of the Worlds, nuclear war is a very present and realistic danger in the 80s with all of these movies that we'll kind of go over. And you mentioned you've seen a lot of these?
Yeah, I've seen quite a few of them.
The following message is transmitted at the request of the United States Coast Guard. A tugboat hijacked by a group of terrorists has made port at Charleston Harbor. The terrorists are demanding the surrender of all nuclear detonation modules stored at Charleston Naval Shipyard. They claim to have their own nuclear device and are threatening to detonate it at 6 p.m. tomorrow if their demands are not met. Stay tuned to TV and radio news outlets for more information.
So we've got Special Bulletin that aired March 20th, 1983, done in the same fashion as the Orson Welles War of the Worlds broadcast. It's a made-for-TV movie, revolves around a terrorist ship in South Carolina's Charleston Harbor that threatens to detonate a nuke if their demands are not met. The whole thing is shot on videotape, so it has that sense of realism. And while there were repeated statements that they played before and after commercial breaks stating that the events were not actually happening, and even the Charleston NBC affiliate had the word fiction in one corner so that their own citizens wouldn't go out and panic, but people still panicked.
Oh, totally. I remember it vividly watching it. And it's important to mention, like during this period of time, it wasn't as easy to disseminate information as it is now. There was no computer that you looked at and you went to Facebook in the morning and it said, by the way, this show's going to be on and it's fake. You were basically, if you didn't read a newspaper that day or you didn't watch the news, then it was word of mouth. Somebody in your life would have had to have seen this, if you did turn it on a half an hour into it and it wasn't a commercial, then it's much easier to get suckered into it back then than it is now. I remember watching it, and I think I watched it alone in the basement, and I didn't tell my parents that I was going to watch it. I think that's how that went. I'm almost positive, because I think had I told my parents, it would have been every 5 seconds, like, this isn't real, right? Which was fine. That's what you do, I guess, when you're a parent. But I just wanted it to really experience it, and I remember it being riveting, absolutely riveting. And I want to say that there was some type of explosion at the end that was done, and maybe I'm wrong about this, maybe this is faulty memory, but I feel like there was a very realistic portrayal of the explosion at the end. Like, it was like this weird, like, it wasn't from this like far away shot of showing stuff blowing up. It just, all of a sudden, things just kind of went out and then came back on. I remember that. I think I remember that, at least. Anyways, I really enjoyed it.
I saw some clips on YouTube, and I thought the one thing that was interesting, they mimicked all the shots that now we kind of take for granted as being very journalistic shots. So the shot of the reporter standing outside the fence with the White House in the background. Just all of those shots where you think, oh, obviously this is real and this is true, because no one would stand outside the White House with a microphone in their hand reporting on something unless they were a journalist. That's a journalist doing their job. So that was a neat way, and just the idea that they used videotape, something that found footage films have now done to great success, but just adding that extra sense of realism to make people believe not only is this being dramatized, and whether or not your folks are telling you it's true or not, that doesn't matter so much as we're making it feel like it's real. And so much so that we're even using techniques and shots and setups that make it feel like it's real. And hopefully there's someone out there that's taking the bait.
Yeah, and that was the way I felt too.
So there's another one, Countdown to Looking Glass. It's a 1984 Canadian mockumentary that features real news personnel who follow the events where there's a blockade of the Gulf between the U.S. and Soviet submarines. That leads to a nuclear exchange between the Soviet and the U.S. And then Congressman Newt Gingrich, former Senator Eugene McCarthy, they appear themselves in shots of news footage. Again, just bringing in archival news footage of these real people in situations that are completely out of context, but to create this fabric of reality that's very much fiction.
Since the Second World War, the ultimate security of the United States has depended on the awesome destructive power of its strategic nuclear forces to deter thermonuclear war. The strength of this deterrence was based on the calculation that we would inflict terrible destruction in retaliation for a nuclear attack. This doctrine of assured destruction is dependent on the certainty in the mind of an aggressor that we have the will and ability to retaliate.
Moving away from nuclear war movies to the 1994 movie Without Warning. Did you ever see that one?
Yes.
So I remember watching Without Warning, aired on CBS, Halloween 1994, 56th anniversary of Wells's War of the Worlds, so great timing. And watching this, I caught it maybe about 30 seconds after it began, and it completely sucks me in. They have this news anchor that at the time I did not know was an actual news anchor from the 60s and 70s on NBC, Sander Van Coor. They have a reporter, Bree Walker, who was an actual newscaster in California 80s. They appear as themselves, and they're covering this breaking story of 3 meteor fragments that crashed into Earth. So I'm watching this, taking this completely on face value that this is all true. And as my mom is kind of weaving out of the living room, I'm trying to get her attention and say, Mom, look what's happening. And she's kind of giving me the, yeah, this isn't real look. What I would imagine your mom would have given to you watching Special Bulletin. But then you start seeing Lonnie Anderson that appears in a cameo. And then they have Q in Star Trek. John Delancey, he's a reporter. And Jane Kaczmarek is also a reporter. She's the mom from Malcolm in the Middle. So I'm starting to recognize these people, and I'm noticing that, yes, that this is obviously fake. They even had an interview with Arthur C. Clarke on there, which was pretty neat. And they're cutting to Wyoming and France and China where these meteorites hit. They're talking to they're interviewing survivors and scientists. And then I finally get my mom's attention, get her to sit down and start watching it. And I'm just like, oh my God, but I'm trying to actually work her into a panic now that I've been let in on the secret, but she won't bite. And then it just becomes disappointing because now I'm just watching this in anger because the very purpose of the broadcast to get people to panic got me panicked. But then when I saw through their ruse, I thought, well, I'm going to pass this on and see if I can get my mom to freak out. But then she just sits there, I guess, like you said, as any calm adult might, and just say, no, this isn't real. And just, no, it's meteorites crashing. They could crash in Chicago, Mom. We need to prepare. Shouldn't you go and do something? He. And she's just sitting there, probably knitting or doing something, looking through the TV guide and saying, nope, what's on after this? It's nothing, Mom. It's the end of the world. That's what's on after this. No, Magnum PI is not on. We can't watch Murder, She Wrote because we're all dead. All right, well, I'm going to go throw a little laundry in.
That's awesome.
So you said you saw this movie.
Yeah, I knew it was fake the whole time.
Damn you.
No, I'm older than you. So at this point in time, I was 90. Would that come out 94?
94, yes. So were you riding the rails in the Midwest?
I was riding the rails
with your harmonica.
Yes, as a hobo musician who sat around his apartment a lot and watched TV. Yeah, no, I remember that. I remember that. God, maybe it's the Lonnie Anderson thing.
Okay.
But there was a certain thing where it seemed real, and then even though I knew it was fake, and then you started to see these actors, and you're like, geez.
Yes.
Now you're giving away your. Had I, maybe I would have been able to verbalize. Like, I'm sure there's some young kid trying to fool his mom right now. What are these?
That was me.
What are these people thinking?
And it even ended with a nice nod to War of the Worlds, and this will ruin it for anyone who hasn't seen it. But at the very end, the scientists revealed that the impacts were in fact attempts at first contact by an alien species, and by sending up nukes and destroying the more oncoming meteors that essentially Earth has declared war on the aliens. So the last scene, you see everyone in this sort of control room environment, and there's Jane Kaczmarek, who's the female reporter, talking to another reporter, and he's just looking at this radar screen, but the camera's on his face, so we can't see what's on the radar screen, but we can see him reacting in this very, like, oh shit, facial expression.
Matt, what is it? Matt, what do you see? Just tell us what you're seeing, Matt. What's the cameraman's name?
I'm told his name is Patrick.
Patrick, just move the camera to the screen. Show us what you're seeing on the screen. Patrick, do you read? Show us what's on the.
Track trajectories. No, there's too many. There's too many to calculate.
Oh my God.
Obviously, we'll stay on as long as we can, and we'll keep feeding you the signal from the Johnson Space Center as long as possible.
This is Houston. Please come in. Please come in.
With all the missiles and all the power.
It was laid on thick, but, for me at the time, trying to get my mom to bite, it should have worked out well. But damn you, Mom, damn you.
Now, I remember that scene on the radar screen vividly. That was well done, because it was like, oh, you thought it was bad before? Here it comes,
I can only leave you with this thought from Shakespeare.
Please, this is Houston Control.
The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars,
Report is gone.
but in ourselves.
Report just came in that Edinburgh has been obliterated.
Cape Town, Washington, this is Houston. Washington, do you read? Washington, this is Houston Control. Please come in. Come in, Washington, this is...
In just a few seconds, Chad and I will continue our conversation on fake documentaries. But in the meantime, remember you can find the Fan to Fan podcast at www.fanpodcast.com. Facebook, just search Fan to Fan Podcast. That's FAN, the number 2, FAN, or on Twitter at Fan to Fan Podcast. I'd love to hear from you, so reach out, send a message, and let me know what you think of the show. Thanks.
And now, on with the show.
Now, have you seen Ghostwatch before?
Yes. I when I lived in Canada, I was looking up, because there are a lot of things that are available in Canada because it's technically one of the colonies still. It is tied into Britain. So things that are available in Britain are very easy to get in Canada. And I was looking up things to watch.
Like healthcare?
Like healthcare is a good one. Paper Money with a picture of the Queen on it is another one. But no, so I was trying to find something scary to watch for Halloween that I hadn't heard of, and I brought up this list, and that came up, and so I went to this Canadian website, and lo and behold, you could stream it. And so I watched it. I thought it was really, really good.
The program you're about to watch is a unique live investigation of the supernatural. It contains material which some viewers may find to be disturbing.
So for anyone who has not heard about Ghost Watch, it aired on Halloween night in 1992, which I think in the end is just all being very reverential to War of the Worlds and its Halloween broadcast in 38. But you have Ghost Watch, which is a show that alleges to report on paranormal experiences of this family, which has been besieged by an apparition that they call pipes. And it featured several real, recognizable BBC personalities, including a few that were in news, but also in children's programming. So they report about these haunting events in a very straightforward fashion, just like some of these other mockumentaries we've been talking about. And they are with the family in their home, not a set, very much a home.
The viewer was told that the Ghost Watch investigation would centre on supernatural activity at a house in Northolt in Middlesex. Michael Parkinson in the studio interviewed experts on the paranormal, and Sarah Green and Craig Charles were on location with the BBC outside broadcast unit at the supposedly haunted house. Sarah's husband Mike Smith was manning a studio phone-in.
We particularly want to hear from you if you've had any personal experiences of ghosts or the supernatural.
The story centred on Mrs. Pamela Early and her young daughters Suzanne and Kimmy. We were told that a university research team had been monitoring their home and that a particularly eventful night had been recorded on video. Later, it emerged that a man had committed suicide in the house some years earlier, and the studio expert suggested that his spirit was now entering the children. Indeed, before our eyes, they began to be increasingly affected.
So the original pitch was supposed to be the 6-part series that was going to air in 1988 about a roving paranormal investigation crew, and they end up at the haunted house, but instead the BBC says, just cut to the chase. So they just cut out to the last, what would be like the ending, the big climax of one big paranormal occurrence. And of course, they do it on Halloween. The haunting involves everything from like rattling, mysterious noises, smashed dishes. There's a part where one of the girls has scratches on her face that she claims are from pipes, the ghost that refuses to leave. So it was all done very much as a production, but it has a bit of a legacy because one woman was reportedly induced into labor from the stress of watching this. One man who had PTSD actually soiled himself. There were over 20,000 documented calls. There was a traumatized 18-year-old who was allegedly driven to suicide. England's Broadcasting Standards Council ruled that the BBC was irresponsible in airing the broadcast without making it very obvious to the 11 million viewers that it was fictional, and that they purposely set out to cultivate a sense of menace.
Mission accomplished.
Yes.
What about you now, you three girls on the front? Natasha McPeak, you watched it. What did you think of it?
Well, I thought it was one sick joke, the way that it was based around children, the way that the children were involved in the actual story. Why did you have to bring the children into it? But it wasn't funny. It wasn't funny at all.
It is a question, I think, Ruth. I mean, a lot of people have written in and rung in saying it's a question of bad taste in the end. I mean, is that good taste?
And this is before the Blair Witch Project. So this is 1992. Blair Witch comes out in 99. And the creator, Stephen Volk, had even actually asked the BBC to allow him to try and insert this high-pitched noise on the soundtrack of the show that would only be audible to animals. So if they were near television, they would start eliciting bizarre behavior that would unsettle viewers even more. But technically, they couldn't figure out how to do it. But nonetheless, I really want to give them a lot of credit for trying, something that I feel like Orson Welles would very much be proud that they would try to do this. But still, just the fact that they use handheld cameras and raw footage, I mean, that's the staple of found footage films. But it just all goes back to this whole idea of the false document, creating something that feels real, sounds real, looks real, but ultimately is not.
Yeah, I think of all of the, because they're, like you said, the Blair Witch Project is scary in the found footage sense, but it's also very localized. It's like there's this evil out here and it happened to these people, and that movie scared the shit out of me, almost literally. But with Ghost Watch, I think very similar. I think it might be, I think, better than Special Bulletin in its sense, and even right up there with War of the Worlds in the sense that it's happening on this mass scale, in the sense that even though the poltergeist is thing, but when like it were happening in homes in the house, when it starts to happen in the studio.
Oh yes,
it just kind of takes on to this, oh, you're going there sort of thing, and it really gets freaky to see like these institutions, these things that even though it's British, you understand that you have the anchor person and the lighting rigs and the desk and the monitors and all this other stuff and the cameras, and you're watching that get screwed by supposedly of something very real that's happening. And I think they did an extremely good job with that, of making it seem like it was actually happening.
And I think this goes back to a comment you made during our Halloween discussion, the idea that as a kid, you mentioned you remember feeling safe within like the confines of your home. If the boogeyman was outside, at least you knew you could hide behind the curtains because that there was some sort of agreed upon barrier that the boogeyman could not enter unless you purposely let him in.
Right.
I think Ghostwatch does a great idea with that. Like you said, the localized idea of evil violating the safety of your home. So if something like this were to happen, I would feel like I might believe something like that more than an alien invasion, where you feel like you would be receiving texts and emails nowadays. And obviously social media and technology has made it very difficult to do something like this, to create something on this level. So it would almost have to be localized, like the Blair Witch Project, where they show the film and people they don't applaud after watching the movie. They're concerned that is this ethical to show the footage of these three people that were killed and use it as a means of entertainment. And it's not until they actually brought out the three actors to kind of show to the audience, no, this was not real. This is all a mockumentary, and these are the actors because they were acting. This is not real. And then the conversation just shifts, and it's like, oh, then this is a great form of entertainment. This is terrific. If we can get people to believe what we just believe, then we'll make millions. And they did. But it just goes back to that idea that maybe that becomes more believable because it's localized. Everyone has that idea of camping in the woods and something terrible happening, and it's not a guy in a hockey mask or someone with claws. It's something more real, like just a noise or a tree moving. Just like in Ghostwatch, it's a dish that falls, and you start kind of filling in the blanks. And if you create the mythology of this apparition that could exist in this house and how it could haunt this family, sure, you could extend it to say that, well, if you're watching this family being haunted, why could an apparition not just jump from the house to the studio and take out the lights and appear in this really crappy but completely believable for 1994 like special effects on the studio with the anchor in his very British way reacting to it.
Yes.
And I think that's something else too, the fact that you don't really associate the British with that kind of a portrayal of the paranormal. You think more Hammer horror. You just think of something much more literal or literary, not necessarily like a boo, we got you type of thing.
I agree. There are a lot of good audio things right now that especially do the kind of, is it real, is it not real, kind of podcasts thing right now. One of them is called The Black Tapes, which is this excellent thing out of British Columbia and Washington. And it's really an interesting podcast. It's obvious that you're listening to people who are acting, but in the same sense, it is such a colossal mindfuck that it's well worth anybody's time. And then there's another one too that I think is called Tanis, which is by the same studio up here, Pacific Northwest something or other. It's just very much that sort of like, hey, we're just putting together a podcast about these kind of supernatural things, and we want to, wait, now all this stuff starts to kind of happen, and wait, can we trust the narrator? Can we trust what's happening? What is actually occurring? And it's good stuff. It's good stuff.
And that seems like a perfect idea for podcasting.
Yeah, it is. It's a great use of the medium.
In just a few seconds, Chad and I will conclude our conversation. But in the meantime, if you are listening on iTunes, please take a moment to rate and review. Just search for the Fan to Fan podcast, go under reviews, enter a star rating, or write a review if you have a second or two, and click send. That's how easy it is. I will greatly appreciate it. Thanks. So I think the last one that I had here, just because it's at least maybe comically worth mentioning, is the Megalodon, The Monster Shark Lives, the 2013 Discovery Channel Shark Week airing.
What the hell was that? We're ready for it. We're about to come face to face with it. Can you guys hear me down there? Come in, can you guys hear me?
Shark Week begins with Megalodon, Sunday at 9 on Discovery.
Did you ever hear about this one, Chad?
I did hear about it, and I just want to say that I when I heard about the supposed uproar about it, I was like, hey, good job, Discovery Channel, of trying to create some type of uproar. Because it was just so funny that anybody would be like, it's not, how could you possibly, show something during Shark Week that isn't real? It's like, what the fuck? Like,
yes,
no,
I didn't see it, but I know
it wasn't very good. It wasn't
well.
Very
okay,
good.
I saw clips of it and some previews online, and it seems like another. If anything, you got to give them credit. It feels like it would be a Shark Week documentary. They're showing photos and videos to make it feel like it's real, but then you see the digitally doctored shark, and any verisimilitude is gone. At that point, it's literally looking at the audience and saying, this can't be real, regardless of whatever brief disclaimer they put at the end. But I thought the little bit of research I did on this one, just because I at least thought, all right, 2013, I'll give the Discovery Channel credit, like you said, for screwing with the audience. Just in a Forbes interview, the producer, when he was approached by Discovery Channel, said, you can't make a documentary about the Megalodon, I guess that's how you say it, in the time frame that they gave him, which was a 6-month period to make a conventional documentary. His suggestion is, well, let's do War of the Worlds, and that's the premise that he used, and they put a little 3-second disclaimer at the end of the whole thing, but for 2 hours, they had everybody. They screwed with everyone and made them believe it, and it was the highest rated show in the history of Shark Week.
Yeah.
Orson Welles, again, would probably say, well done, mission accomplished. This is exactly what I was trying to do, is to get people to talk about my thing, because I guarantee you, more people were probably listening to the Mercury Theater on-air broadcast after the War of the Worlds broadcast on that Halloween than they were on that night of Halloween.
Oh yeah, that's a great point. And I do think that the reason that I rip on the Megalodon show is because the type of genre that it's kind of, for lack of a better term, trying to spoof, but seriously spoof, is flimsy itself. Like a lot of the Discovery things, we want to all believe that it's all based on science, but a lot of it isn't. And a lot of it is just based on best guesses that aren't exactly correct. And there's a lot of really dramatic stuff that happens, and they basically cram like 4 years of incredibly boring research to most people into a 45-minute, documentary that seems like there's always things happening. So to make fun of that within itself was kind of a flimsy premise. That said, obviously it worked. And it did make me rewatch, like when I watch a Discovery Channel documentary now, or even like a National Geographic, I kind of feel like, do you remember, like there was that thing where the first year that the MTV show The Real World was on?
Sure.
It was like this, it was kind of, there was kind of boring stuff, but then they, like it started to pick up, and these people were acting in this, like they were acting like people for the most part. But then the second season, the cast had already started to act like what they had watched during the first season.
Yes.
So it had become, and that's kind of the way that like I've been watching Discovery Channel since I saw the Megalodon thing, which is that how many of these people aren't just aware that even if they're scientists, they're kind of acting anyways, and they've been given things to say, and it's an interesting blurring of the line.
Well, even like Travel Channel and Discovery Channel, National Geographic, they've started to air a lot of those destination unknown type things where they deal with mythology and Bigfoot, but they present it again in a way that makes it feel like it's true. They cut to scientists that look very scientific in a laboratory. All of these things that are true. Yes, scientists work in laboratories and they wear white coats and they have glasses, obviously. And when they're talking about this mythical creature, I think it goes back to that point you said that Chris Carter used as the premise of X-Files. I want to believe. If you have a filmmaker that can play with that idea that we all want to believe in this, we want to believe that there's a creature running around in the Appalachians, and again, it would be mission accomplished if you can get people to take that idea that they want to believe and make them believe for just a little bit, that would be the point. But like you said, it'd have to be localized. Kind of playing around with the idea of like Blair Witch or even War of the Worlds, something that we all worry about, going out to the woods and camping and something happening, playing with fears that we all have in an interesting way, and then creating some really cool entertainment from it. And then the whole time Orson Welles would just be smiling.
Most definitely. With a little what was it, Gallo wine?
Oh, I don't know. I was going to say gallows humor, but that would work.
Gallows.
That's it for this episode. Tune in next time for more fan-to-fan conversations on the Fan-to-Fan podcast. Thanks for listening.
A tale of terror that will leave you limp. So hideous and shocking, you won't believe your eyes. His hunger for victims was never satisfied.